All right, everybody, welcome to the show. So today we'll discuss in detail how the world is falling apart right in front of our eyes. So wait until you hear about what's happening in Ecuador. I have that story later. It's basically a narco-terrorist coup that's unfolding in front of us. Of course, I'm going to give you Israel updates in just a second here. I'm going to lead with that. We have the fighting between Hezbollah and the IDF is escalating even more. That is not a good sign at all. We have direct threats from the IDF to turn Beirut into Gaza. We have the U.S. now being legally implicated as basically an accomplice to Israel's genocide in Gaza. We're arming them, we're funding them, and the International Court of Justice in South Africa in particular are taking notice of that. So we'll break all that down for you. I have Joe Biden being berated during a speech he gave in South Carolina. Pro-Palestine protesters really checked his ass. Can't wait to talk about that and tell you the reaction to what went down. Then we'll get to, oh my God, Trump's attorney. I don't know where he gets these people because they are like the worst attorneys I've ever seen in my life. I guess he's blown through so many of them that he can't get a good attorney anymore, but they're out there arguing that actually he has legal immunity even from crimes such as murder. All right, wait for it. Wild stuff. And then we'll also get to Ben Shapiro responds to Tucker Carlson's personal attack on him. And we love it when people on the right are at each other's throats. So that is nothing but joy and fun. Anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. Everybody do me a big favor. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps out massively in the algorithm. It doesn't cost you anything. It takes you 2 seconds. And we're trying to continue to grow the community here. Okay, so let me just start with this, with what's happening in Gaza. I want to give you an update on the numbers, but as of right now, the most updated numbers we have, at least as of the recording of this segment, is January 4th. So we're already on January 10th. So take everything I'm going to tell you here with a grain of salt, knowing that the numbers are probably much, much larger now because the hostilities and the shooting and the slaughter and the bombing, none of that has stopped. It's continued. All right, so according to Euromed Monitor, the human rights group, we have 30,676 Palestinians who are now dead. 28,201 of them are civilians. 12,040 of them are children. 6,103 of them are women. Now, by the way, I just want to point this out real quick, and I feel like I should do this more often when we discuss these numbers. Understand that these are not just numbers. Like, all these people, all 28,201 civilians are individuals, are people with stories and lives and histories and emotions, and some of them are grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles and daughters and children and babies, and you have, these are human beings. And so almost like when you bring up the numbers and just the numbers, it sort of becomes too abstract and cerebral, and it doesn't really humanize it for people. Understand that's 28,201 individual horror stories where they got taken from this earth too soon. So we have that. Again, the numbers are almost certainly way bigger than this now. I'm sure everything's going to go up at least 2,000 or so, because it's been since January 4th since we had an update. There's 58,960 people who are injured. At the same time, you have the hospital system in Gaza basically collapsed. I mean, maybe there's a handful of hospitals that are still functioning to some capacity, but we know there's been no anesthesia, there's been no power. In fact, Israel has attacked some of the other power sources that they have. Israel has been targeting them recently. We have journalists now dead, 105. They've been killed. More on that later. We have another one to add to that list. We have displaced people, 1.935 million. That's of 2.3 million people who live in Gaza. And, look, we've gone through this many times, and I don't want it to feel like just normal when I bring these. Yep, like, okay, that's where we are. No, this is horrific, and it should be a shock to your system. 201 mosques that have been damaged, some of them directly bombed, 3 churches. And, I mean, I don't need to say anything else, but you can pause the video, look at these numbers, and just understand the scope and scale of the atrocities. All right, so let me get to this. A group of South African lawyers have written to the U.S. president warning his government that they intend instituting proceedings against them for being complicit in ongoing international crimes perpetrated by Israel against the people of Palestine. So in other words, we see United States of America, we know you're the accomplice. We know you're effectively the driving force behind this. Israel would not be able to pull this off without your funding and your arming. And we're taking notice. And there are going to be consequences for that. Now, look, I don't know. Is this going to make it more likely or less likely that the ICJ in South Africa can actually pull this off? I would guess it would make it less likely. So, because when you single out the world's sole superpower who doesn't play by the rules, never played by the rules, and swats the rules aside and is hostile to them, I think it makes it more likely that the U.S. will just sort of snub their nose at the entire proceeding and act like it doesn't matter. But as a matter of principle, what they're doing is the right thing to do. You have to do this because it's true. We are an accomplice in it. And, you know, our top officials who are involved in the decision-making are just as big of criminals as Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. And again, don't buy into the tut-tut and the finger-wagging where Biden pretends like, oh, you know, we're so concerned about the civilian casualties, bro. We're saying you should bomb nicely and more humanitarianly. If Biden was actually against it, he would have cut off the weapons. He has the power to stop this. He pretends like he doesn't, but he absolutely does. So that's a big deal. The U.S. now being involved with international crimes. All right, next. So Hezbollah announced that they're targeting a region of northern Gaza where there's a command headquarters for the IDF in the city of Safed. That's 13 kilometers from the border, with a number of explosive-laden drones. And the attack was in retaliation to Israel killing Saleh Arori and Wissam Tawil. So this is part of that tit for tat that we've discussed. Israel has been knocking off various top Hezbollah commanders. They've been doing the same with top Hamas commanders. In fact, they bombed in Beirut. They bombed a top Hamas commander who was there. So because they keep doing those sorts of bombings, doing those sorts of assassinations, that opens up the door to retaliatory strikes. And now what we're seeing is Hezbollah has targeted overwhelmingly military targets, but now they're targeting military targets that are deeper into Israel, which of course is viewed yet again in turn as another escalation, and we're off to the races. So I told you guys this, but U.S. intelligence analysts ran the numbers on this and played out the war games, and they found out that in every possible scenario, with the facts on the ground as they exist right now, it's spiraled out of control every single time to a wider regional war. It's absolutely terrifying stuff, and I don't think anybody is taking it nearly as seriously as they need to. So look at this. Blinken said to Israel, you have to let northern Gazans return home, okay? Washington is interested in starting the return of Palestinians to the northern Gaza Strip as soon as possible. Okay. Now, just right off the bat here, Anthony Blinken knows that is literally not possible. Northern Gaza is wiped off the map. 70% of Gaza is totally uninhabitable. There is nothing to go back to. And he knows that because he was part of the process that greenlit the destruction of northern Gaza. So, I don't know. He's probably just doing PR ass covering here to make it look like, oh, the U.S. was always for Palestinians returning. But in reality, he knows that's not true. Well, Israel responds, the return of the residents of northern Gaza is not possible before progress is made on the prisoners issue. But Israel will allow a UN delegation to enter the northern Gaza Strip. Benny Gantz to Blinken, Israel is committed to eliminating the threat posed by Hamas in the south. We must change the situation in the north to enable residents to return to their homes. It is necessary to continue efforts to reach an agreement to return the kidnapped persons. Ben-Gvir responded to Blinken with the following. The time is not appropriate to talk softly with Hamas, but rather to use a long stick with it. So the overwhelming consensus coming out of Israel is basically brushing off Blinken and being like, it's not happening. It's not even possible. Something, Hamas. So we have to keep doing this. So you still have, missions in northern Gaza to the extent that northern Gaza even exists anymore. And of course you have targeting in the south, where now primarily they're going after in Khan Yunis and other places in the south. So they're basically saying, we're not going to stop until we get rid of Hamas. Now, by the way, 92% of the people who've been killed are not at all Hamas. They're not at all Hamas. And of the 2.3 million people in Gaza, there's only about 30,000 Hamas fighters. So you're not going to eliminate them. It's not even possible to eliminate them. But they know that because in reality, their goal is basically to ethnically cleanse, purge, voluntarily relocate whoever remains, and then resettle Gaza. And by the way, Ben-Gvir actually openly says that. So all this stuff from Blinken and Biden, the idea of like, let the Palestinians return and then have the Palestinian Authority take over Gaza and they'll be the ones in control there. Like, all that actually sounds fine on paper. It sounds good on paper. But I think they know that that's not even possible at the moment, based on the reality on the ground, how northern Gaza doesn't even exist anymore. So again, I'm curious what you guys think, but I view this from Blinken as more PR ass covering, like, oh, us? No, we're in favor of the Gazans returning to Gaza. I don't think he actually, I think he knows that that's not even possible at the moment. Okay, so more. This is in the Wall Street Journal, really interesting article. Israel's Yoav Galant, quote, "We are fighting an axis, not a single enemy." So in other words, we're not just going after Hamas here, we're also going after Hezbollah in Lebanon. We're going after other Shia militant groups in Iraq and in Syria. We want to go after Iran because we view them as like the head of the snake and funding all of the people who we view as our enemies. So he said this. He also said in this piece that he wants to copy and paste what happened in Gaza to Beirut. In fact, he warns Hezbollah, we'll just copy and paste what we did in Gaza to Beirut. Now, by the way, I take those threats seriously, but also at the same time, you need to understand Israel has drastically underestimated Hezbollah every step of the way. In fact, the attack launched on the IDF base the other day, which was pretty successful, they didn't realize that Iron Dome wouldn't protect them for that, and they didn't realize the advanced nature of the weaponry, the bombs, the missiles that were used by Hezbollah. So I think they've drastically underestimated them. But then I have one more interesting piece in this article that I wanted to share with you. As Galant sees it, a multinational task force led by the U.S. with European and Middle Eastern partners should oversee the rehabilitation of Gaza. So, in other words, what they are basically asking is, we want the U.S. to come in and occupy Gaza and rebuild Gaza. So understand what's going on here. With our money, with U.S. money and U.S. weapons, they commit an ethnic cleansing and a genocide and bomb Gaza to smithereens. Then Israel turns around and tells us, now you guys go in there and you guys occupy it and you guys rebuild it. You lead the task force in order to do that. No, Gaza should be for Gazans. Palestinian territory should be for Palestinians. And, you could just stop destroying Gaza. You could just stop doing the ethnic cleansing. But of course, they would laugh that position out of the room. So we have, this one is really interesting. So you see this guy right here on screen. He is an Israeli politician. And he is super brave because he came out and basically said, yeah, I think Israel's committing a genocide. Now, remember, guys, when you look at the polling coming out of Israel, it was like 1.6% or 1.8% of the population said less force should be used in Gaza. So, you want to talk about a minority position. It is a tiny sliver that looks at what's happening and goes, oh my God. The overwhelming majority either support it or want it to go further. So even though the population is like very anti-Netanyahu, don't mistake that as like, oh, they're peaceniks and they're doves and they want like a Palestinian state or whatever the case. That's not true. So this guy comes out and stands up to the mob and is very brave. So this is in Common Dreams. To defend Israel as a moral society, Knesset member backs South Africa's ICJ genocide case. Quote, "This is the true patriotism. No revenge wars and calls for extermination. No unnecessary bloodshed. And no sacrifice of kidnapped citizens and soldiers in false wars," said the Knesset minister Ofer Kasif. Member of the Knesset, Ofer Kasif, is being targeted for removal from the legislative body Monday, a day after the Israeli lawmaker said he would back South Africa's genocide case at the International Court of Justice. So in other words, he comes out and says something mega-based and totally true and something that's obvious to outsiders looking in at what Israel's doing. And now they're trying to remove his ass. In his Sunday assessment, Kasif declared, "My constitutional duty is to Israeli society and all its residents, not to a government whose members and its coalition are calling for ethnic cleansing and even actual genocide." Kasif, the sole Jewish representative in the predominantly Arab Hadash Ta'al party, said it was right-wing lawmakers and top officials in the Netanyahu government backing the relentless assault on Gaza, who hurt the country and the people. They are the ones who led South Africa to turn to The Hague, not me and my friends. And when the government acts against society, the state, and its citizens, especially when it sacrifices them and commits crimes in their name on the altar of maintaining its existence, it is my right and even my duty to warn about this and do everything I can within the law to stop it. I will not give up the fight for our existence as a moral society. This is the true patriotism. No revenge wars and calls for extermination. No unnecessary bloodshed. And no sacrifice of kidnapped citizens and soldiers in false wars. So, of course, this guy is getting the ire of, the Israeli elite class. And I just want to take a moment to appreciate him because this is very, very brave. This is very, very brave what he's doing. And look, to be fair, even from a strategic perspective, I think what he's saying makes sense. Because, we talked about it time and time again. How many more orphans are you creating? How many more innocent people are you killing? Now, what do you think the politics of that person's family members are going to be? I've never seen a better recruitment campaign for Hamas than killing 12,000 children, killing 28,000 civilians. That absolutely will increase support for Hamas. We've literally seen it in the West Bank in the polling. And in Gaza, I'm sure if you're going to be dead set on retribution and revenge and retaliation. And so you probably tripled or quadrupled the members of Hamas. And so even from a strategic perspective, yes, for the security of the state of Israel, this guy's 100% right. He's right morally and ethically and as a matter of principle, and he's right strategically. So very, very brave for him to come out and say this. Much credit to him. Okay. Families of Israelis killed in Be'eri home, hit by IDF tank on October 7th, demand a probe. So in other words, we heard about this in like various kibbutz. They would be, there was fire that was opened up on them from IDF tanks. In fact, there was one soldier who literally said it on Israeli TV in a news segment that like we were ordered to fire on the kibbutz. And we were like, well, hold on, aren't there civilians in there? And then they said, well, I don't care, just shoot. We covered that story. How many times did that happen, right? At the music festival that Hamas came, paraglided into and then started doing terrorism, there was also like a line of like at least 30 or 40 or 50 cars that were totally destroyed. They were lit on fire. They became like hunks of shrapnel that we saw after the fact. Well, in that scenario, who had the kind of weaponry that could make 50 cars, burn to a crisp? Well, it's probably the IDF. So just how far did this go where the IDF was engaged in friendly fire and killing Israeli citizens? Like, how far did this go? And this is what these families are saying. Like, we've seen enough evidence to merit an investigation that, we think maybe some of our family members were killed by you guys. We're killed by the IDF. So, and remember, when you look at the numbers, this is a fact. It's an uncomfortable fact that people don't want to grapple with. But if I remember them correctly, even according to the IDF's own numbers, Hamas killed 55% military targets, 45% innocent civilians. Israel's killing 92% innocent civilians, according to Euromed Monitor, the human rights group. The UN is probably going to have that number in the 80-some-odd percentile range. And even Israel putting their best foot forward with the least accurate numbers, where they say every military-age male is a combatant, every military-age male is a member of Hamas. It's not remotely true, but even when you count it that way, Israel has still killed 61% innocent civilians, which is a worse percentage than Hamas. So really, really incredible stuff here. And the families of the hostages are waking up and they're on to what's going on here. All right. Look at that. I'm telling you, man, Israeli politicians are trying to make the case for South Africa at the ICJ a complete and utter slam dunk. Like Air Jordan in his prime type slam dunk with some of the stuff that they're saying. And they have a long list. Here's what this person said. Here's what that person said. Here's how genocidal this is. Here's how genocidal that is. We got a new one. Israeli MP Nissim Vaturi in press remarks, Gaza and its people must be burned. I have no pity for them. Added to the list. I'm sure that list is growing every single day when you talk about the genocidal comments of these Israeli politicians. Israel accused of effort to intimidate the judges ahead of genocide hearings. Israel is pressing others to denounce the case in the hope of persuading the International Court of Justice to decide based on politics rather than the facts, said one critic. The Israeli government has mounted a pressure campaign urging governments around the world to publicly denounce South Africa's genocide case at the International Court of Justice, which is set to convene hearings on the detailed charges on Thursday. According to a cable obtained by Axios, the Israeli Foreign Ministry is calling on the country's embassies to pressure host country diplomats and political leaders to swiftly issue an immediate and unequivocal statement along the following lines: to publicly and clearly state that your country rejects the outrageous, absurd, and baseless allegations made against Israel. The cable warns that a ruling by the court could have significant potential implications that are not only in the legal world, but have practical bilateral, multilateral economic security ramifications. Israel is seeking to prevent an injunction ordering the country to suspend its attack on Gaza. So we talked about this the other day, but that is the short-term goal with these trials, with this case at the International Court of Justice. They're trying to say, all right, if you judges think there's even the possibility, if it's even remotely plausible that what's happening now is indeed a genocide, then issue an injunction and say they have to stop everything they're doing until this case comes to a conclusion, which will take a few years. And so that's what we're waiting on. That'll be a big decision. Now, by the way, what I fear in this scenario is not just the pressure campaign from Israel. I fear more just out-and-out bribery and corruption behind the scenes. A lot of people don't know this. If you listen to the Martyr Made podcast, which is a great podcast on Israel-Palestine and the genesis of it and the history of it, what happened when they came up with the partition plan at the UN is it was gonna be voted down. This was like the first thing the UN did. This is like right after the UN came into existence, and it was gonna be voted down. But then Israel went around literally bribing representatives or ambassadors from other countries, and then it passed. And so that's what I fear more than anything. Not just this pressure campaign, which is above board and a political maneuver. I fear like literal bribery behind the scenes to try to get the outcome that they want. And don't put it past them, because the way politics works is just as dirty as you imagine it to be. So, but even this is like, it actually kind of reminds me of the Trump strategy. Trump knows that in the courtroom he's getting his ass kicked with his 91 criminal charges. He was just found liable for fraud in New York, business fraud, insurance fraud, etc. And his strategy was, I'm just going to try to win this in the realm of politics. So I'll sit in the courtroom and take my beating and be found guilty or be found liable. And then when I get out, I'll go to the steps of the courthouse and do a political rant where I say, look at this, political persecution. They just hate Trump. This is unfair. This is a witch hunt, yada, yada. And that's the only strategy he had. And I think Israel feels like that's the only strategy they have as well, which speaks to also to how guilty they are. All right, here we go. So Lord Cameron, this is according to Sky News, admits he does not know if the UK considers Gaza to be occupied by Israel. So I'm going to play this clip for you. Then I want to show you a great tweet from one of the Chapo guys, which I think nails exactly what's going on here. Let's watch.
Fine, so just to take back for a moment, what is the UK's current legal position on whether or not Gaza is occupied?
Our position is that that Israel is fighting a campaign against Hamas. We have to check regularly whether that is in compliance with international humanitarian law and assess that. I don't think Israel regards itself as an occupying force, but whether that is correct, I would want to take legal advice, because this comes to this issue about aid, where I think Israel needs to do more, a lot more, to get more aid into Gaza, which perhaps we can come on to.
Forgive me, we know that Israel does not consider itself to be an occupying power, but British law currently does consider Gaza to be an occupied power. Can you, an occupied territory. Can you just confirm that on the record?
I don't know the precise legal definition of that. I'd have to go back and check.
Philip?
So Will Menaker from Chapo says, it's hilarious watching people who have jobs like UK Foreign Minister or US Secretary of State all have to be like, I'm not an expert on any of these issues regarding international law. Don't know why I'm being asked these questions. Like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Guys, Gaza, it's a total blockade. It's a total embargo. Now we know it's a complete and utter siege. No food, no fuel, no water. They control every single aspect of life in Gaza. And people still are saying, well, Israel stopped occupying Gaza, stopped settling Gaza in 2005, bro. What's the problem, bro? That is such a slimy, weaselly, disingenuous argument. And anybody who ever makes that argument, immediately dismiss them as biased beyond belief or stupid or lying. Because it's just so obviously untrue. Obviously, the nature of the occupation in the West Bank and the nature of the occupation in Gaza is different. But the idea that you take issue with calling it an occupation is preposterous. What if somebody did a total embargo against you, did complete and utter sanctions and blockade against you, controlled food, fuel, water, electricity, etc. Couldn't control whether you left or stayed. You know, you have no rights. Would it be fair for somebody to say, I don't think that's an occupation? I mean, come on, man. Come on. All right. Now let's move to this. We got this one again. I don't know who this woman is. I'm literally distraught at the fact that I had to learn she existed this week, but we played a clip of her being smug and arrogant and obnoxious the other day to somebody who was making the case for Palestinians. I guess her name is Julia Hartley Brewer. Even her name sounds annoying. And she's going to give us just a brilliant thought here that I wanted to share with you guys. Let's listen.
Maybe you should take these people. Maybe the solution is that these people aren't in this sort of prison camp that Gaza's been called, even though, of course, actually you see pictures before, not at all a prison camp. But that maybe, these people should be offered a new life elsewhere. Now, many may not want it, but we have seen, and I was really surprised when I discovered this. This is my own ignorance, and apologies for that, but the awful phrase ethnic cleansing, I don't like that phrase. There's a difference between, people being killed to be removed from a piece of land than the forced expulsion. This has happened numerous times, and in recent years, since the Second World War, there were huge numbers of peoples in their millions who were moved from lands, moved to basically there was non-stop fighting between ethnic minorities. Right, you're going to Greece, you're going to Turkey, you're going to Albania, you're going wherever. This has actually been incredibly common, and of course we've seen the ethnic cleansing of Jews and Christians in the Middle East without anyone batting an eyelid about that. Do you think that may be the answer?
I mean, I think
she's literally asking, what's a little ethnic cleansing here and there? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the big deal? As long as you do it, like, non-violently, because, there's definitely a way to non-violently kick somebody off their land against their will, right? Some soldiers show up with guns, and they point it at the person, and they say, you better get out of your own damn home, or we're going to kill you. But that's, if you do it without anybody actually getting hurt, that's fine, right? What? Look, here's the thing that's driving me crazy about what we're witnessing in Gaza right now. Despite everybody's political differences, their deep differences, I had some sense, and I think most people did, that on some level, we all agree to some very, very basic things. Like, for example, ethnic cleansing and genocide is wrong no matter who does it. But what I've learned over these past however many months it's been now, is that, of course, not only is that not true, it's not even close to true. You basically have in the West like a 50-50 debate, and some of the loudest voices in media being on the wrong side, saying, actually, I think in this instance, ethnic cleansing and genocide is either not ethnic cleansing and genocide, or it is and it's okay that it's those things. In this case, she's like, well, what's the problem? What's the big deal? What's the big deal? You forcibly remove somebody from where they've lived their entire life, on their land, on their property. You forcibly remove them somewhere else, and then you say, hey, this has happened historically. Oh, that argument drives me crazy. It's like when people bring up the bombing of Dresden and the nuking of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like, well, we've done horrific atrocities in the past, so why wouldn't we do horrific atrocities today? No, the whole point is, this is why we have the Nuremberg Tribunal and the Geneva Conventions and the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice and international humanitarian law. We have that because everybody looked at the horrors of what happened and said, let's not be fucking idiots. These are horrors. We need to stop it. But no, people are literally invoking that. Like, what's the problem? Just do more atrocities. Yeah, well, I'm sure if it was happening to you and your family members and your friends, I'm sure you'd have the same reaction. What's a little atrocity here and there? Sure, kill my best friend. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay. Israel kills journalist Hiba Abadle, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, and her daughter in an airstrike that targeted their house in Gaza. So now, the number from Euromed Monitor was 105 journalists killed by Israel. Now that number's, again, certainly going to go up. We've had a number of stories in the past few days of more journalists being directly targeted. Israel's targeted journalists and academics on purpose. Anybody who's good at getting the story and the narrative for Palestinians out there, that's what they do to them. All right, and finally, X suspended the official account of Hamas's military wing only a few hours after it was created. The account had over 125,000 followers in a few hours. Social media users criticized the move as all Israeli military accounts, including the IOF's, continue to exist on the platform. So look, let's understand something. This is in no way, shape, or form a defense of Hamas and their tactics and their strategies and their war crimes. But if you have the IDF, whose leaders are literally making genocidal comments on a daily basis, we've heard these people float nuking Gaza multiple times. We've heard them say Palestinians are human animals. We've heard them say there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. We've heard them say we're going to thin out Gaza, do voluntary relocation, which isn't really voluntary after we bomb your house. They've said all manner of genocidal things. And they are also in the process of having those actions back up those genocidal comments. They are following through with it. North Gaza no longer exists. You have 28,000 dead Palestinian civilians. And if the IDF can stay on there and lie every single day relentlessly, then there is no reason why Hamas can't get on. Oh, but Hamas are terrorists. They killed innocent civilians. The IDF has literally killed more innocent civilians. And if you genuinely think that, well, Hamas means to kill civilians and the IDF doesn't, if you believe that at this late date, I don't know what to tell you. You're just ignorant as fuck, or you're an idiot, or you're lying. Because you don't get a 92% civilian death rate as an oopsie. You don't get that. That's not a thing. And remember, Hamas killed 55% military targets, 45% innocent civilians. So any argument used to say you got to keep Hamas off would also apply to the IDF. Even just the dumb argument of like, well, if it's state-sanctioned violence, then it's okay, then it's allowed. Well, Hamas is technically the government of Gaza. So that, in a sense, is state-sanctioned violence when they do violence as well. Now, look, I don't agree with the violence, right? But if you're going to allow the IDF to go out there and say insane things on a daily basis, you have to allow Hamas to do the same thing. But this just goes to show you the bias. So anyway, that's the segment for today. More terrible updates here coming out of Gaza. I'll keep my eye on it, but as per usual, I don't expect much to change. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.